Hi everybody, I'm Sam Allen, the Chief Exec of the North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board, and welcome to the first in what will be a podcast series called Beyond the Now. So I'll be talking to a wide range of leaders across health, social care, the private and the public sector to really understand their leadership journeys, challenges, opportunities, but also thinking about not just today, but where we're going over the weeks, months, and indeed the years ahead. So I'm really delighted that for the first ever series in our podcast, we've got Sir James Mackey. And you'll know that news broke recently that he's joined NHS England as the transitional chief executive for the NHS. And I'm sure Jim doesn't need any introduction. Jim is incredibly well known here in the North East and has led highly successful organisations. Most recently, he's been at the Newcastle Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, and prior to that has spent a few decades at Northumbria Healthcare as well, which is renowned for not just the quality of the care that it provides, but also the outcomes that it delivers. And I can testify to that personally, having been a patient myself of that trust in the past year. So, Jim, this is a conversation as much as anything, but just a huge welcome to you. It has been a kind of challenging couple of weeks, and I don't think you even really started officially in the job yet. So I just wonder whether you can kind of just talk us through, really, as a leader going through this transition, what this couple of weeks has been and the sorts of things you're going to be doing in the role.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. And it's been really weird in lots of ways. There's so much happening in a couple of weeks, and I have to keep telling myself pretty much every night I haven't started yet. I start on the 1st of April. So we've had to start on a lot of things early, because one of the early agreements we got was I had to pick up the planning process quite quickly, because obviously it's going to run, it's going to set the tone for the whole of the year. And then the rate at which changed at a kind of government level, and the expectation and the issues between NHS England and DHSE and the merger there as well just happened over a number of days. So it's been really complex, very fast moving. Really stimulating though. I think in these things you get energy from. NHS managers live on adrenaline and stuff, don't we? So there's a bit of that, but a huge amount as well about just trying to stay grounded, stay focused, remember what the tasks are, try and keep people with us, because there's still times when it just feels all just too big, very overwhelming, an awful lot to do. So just try and strip it back as much as you can.
Yeah, and I'm just really curious, sort of going from leading large organisations, hospital, community services, different services, to suddenly feeling that sense of responsibility leading a national health service. Yeah. How are you what's that meant for you in terms of your leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in all of these leadership jobs, whether you're running a small trust or working at a national level, there's a big responsibility that comes with it. So early on, that was sort of built into me with the people that I was working with and bosses at the time, to take the responsibility seriously. Don't overthink it, because it's paralysing, but respect it, nurture it, work with it. And this all came at a time when internationally things are very unstable. The NHS is very big economically, has a big impact on our economy, and in the concerns about our productivity and financial performance, and that did add quite a bit of extra complexity to the kind of sense of responsibility. But I think we've just got to keep trying to strip it back. It's about delivering care for people, delivered largely by people, and stay focused on that bit, which is the important bit.
Yeah, and I suppose being the National Health Service, I think we're still the 5th biggest employer in the world, so it's a huge amount of people involved in delivering care and also supporting the delivery of care. It has been a tough week for people working in the service, particularly with inevitably some of the announcements you've had to make, Jim. And I just wonder and I've got my own reflections on this as a leader, and it'd be good to kind of share some of those, really. But the sort of the impact on people, and I suppose thinking about the future, kind of going to where we're today and how we navigate this for people, what some of your feelings have been, I think, having to make these announcements.
No, it's a really good question. So I really care about the people I work with and who work with us across the NHS. In trusts, it feels more direct because you're with, you can see people, you're with people all the time. In the national system, it's clearly much more distributed, 1.5 million people working in the service. But when you're having to make these decisions or communicate these decisions, you actually have to remember there are people at the end of it. So desensitizing is a dangerous thing, I think, when it becomes impersonal or you don't care. I don't think you should be doing it. You've got to really feel that. Ideally, we would have had more time to talk about it, manage it over a period of time, but we haven't. So we've got to deal with it as kindly and as compassionately as we can. And in all of the messages, I've had thousands of messages since it was first said I was going to do this role, and then also as things were said last week, the two messages really stood out and really kind of got to me. So one was I was in board here in Newcastle, having come back from London on the day the news broke that I was going to do the job, and I got a message from a guy who was my maths teacher at school, and I felt really emotional about it. And then there was a bunch of responses from people in Hebburn, where I was brought up, about this is important, we love the NHS, we need the NHS to do well. So that sense of responsibility really kind of kicked in. And then on the day we had to make the announcements about the reductions in cost, a colleague, chief exec, who I've worked with before, sent me a message to say, I know you'll be feeling this. And you remembered I was a human as well. So I think we're actually pretty good at this, looking after each other. But we've all got to remember we've got to look after the people as best we can in these processes, because it's going to affect a lot of people's lives. What we've got to do isn't negotiable. What we can do is do it really well. Do it as kindly as possible, as fairly as possible, as quickly as possible, and do our level best to get people into new lives, new roles, new futures where they've come out the other end and it's worked.
Yeah, and I kind of knowing you and having worked with you a number of years now, that kind of real sense of the sort of the human side of you, that this really matters in terms of not just our population and the people, kind of doing our best for our community. And I suppose it's one of those founding values that all leaders in the health service have got, that kind of desire when we get up in the morning, we want to come and be part of something that's making a difference. And I suppose navigating through transitions is tricky. It brings a range of emotions, and one way of navigating through it easier is a sort of that path to where we're going to. And so I suppose it would be really good to kind of hear about some of your, I guess, the sort of the hope around the future, the kind of moving beyond where we are today, and what that could bring for patients and colleagues.
I think that's a great point, because a lot of this feels about heavy lifting and it's tough stuff. It's about the money, it's about headcount, all those kinds of grippy things, which generally isn't what people come into this to do. It's more, we want a purpose around improving things for people. I think the thing that we should all really hang on to, and I think will release a lot of energy, is the 10-year plan. The bits I've seen, draftings of, the discussions I've been involved with. I was involved in 3 discussions about it yesterday. It is genuinely really energising. Will give everybody, I think, the public and our staff, a better feeling of things will be much better in the future. If we do deliver some things, it's always couched in the kind of, we've got to get more stable first. So there's a consolidation phase and then a development phase. But, really some fantastic stuff about neighbourhood care, getting much more orientated around the vulnerable and vulnerable parts of society, the bits that we're all bothered about in our local places, about our sense of responsibility for the local population, more focus on standards and quality again. I think generally people will read it and think, wow, that's fantastic. And also trying to bring about the ability to build things again, to deploy technology without having to be in a very long queue for national money, to if we need to build an emergency department for people with mental health crisis, the ability to do that So they're all things that I think we've all struggled with over the last few years, the inability to turn good ideas into action, and the energy from clinical colleagues, the desire from clinical colleagues into real stuff. And I think that's not far away again.
Yeah. And you've always been an advocate for learning and improvement. I think at Northumbria, you really early on built patient experience measures into your work. Kind of where do you see a sort of that culture of learning and improvement kind of reflected in the future NHS and people's roles as leaders across the service?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a debate going on about the best way of doing this. You know, we've had periods in time when we've made big leaps from an improvement point of view, and a lot of people go back to the modernisation agency period when we're starting to deliver on the constitutional standards, and it was hugely helpful. But the world's changed a lot since then, how the NHS is organised, or we've all got improvement capability within organisations, you know. So there's a bit of a debate going on about how best to do this. I mean, I think in reality, the energy's there. It's about harnessing the energy and connecting people as best we can. So it's easier to see and learn from people who've done something wonderful in Yorkshire and Cornwall or whatever, because we are still often quite parochial and it's quite hard to see what's going on elsewhere. And a lot of improvement activity is, you know, local and on the shop floor and stuff, but it's really good to see what's going on elsewhere and then start connecting people again in those, you know, had all the old improvement collaboratives. Can we polish those things and update them for today's world? We've got much better technology. It's much easier to share these things than it was then.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm really interested on the technology. I don't know, we're looking at the artificial intelligence and just things like Copilot on Teams and the way in which that can speed up how we approach things. What are some of the kind of digital innovations that you've seen out there that kind of genuinely excite you, Jim, around the potential for improvement?
So I think there's a couple of things. There are lots of, I think we overdo AI at times, but when you see what AI can do with triage and working out where we should worry about things versus statistically what we should worry less about and how that can order workflow, there are some really good emerging technologies now that look like they can make a real impact there. I honestly think the thing I've been most excited about in recent years is the use of the portals, patient portals, and the app, and the combination of the two to fundamentally change how you access care. So that bit about, you know, we're all busy people, but that ability not to be in a queue where the institution's telling you what's going to happen, and you can actually choose that yourself in the way that you would book a restaurant or you would book to go to the cinema or something like that. To have that control again, that's actually with us now. It's being used now. It's not used everywhere for everything, but the ability to power that up, I think, is absolutely unbelievable. I also think it'll reduce demand.
Yeah.
Because I think people are more careful about using resource when they've got control of it. So I think that could really, God knows where that'll take us, but hopefully huge improvements.
I know I was talking to somebody the other day. I've kind of just hit a milestone birthday, and it seemed to have resulted in a plethora of screening invitations coming through the door. I must have had about 4 or 5 different letters, different ways of booking, all taking a phone call. And I'm thinking, actually, if all of that just came through the app, it would be so much more straightforward.
Got a couple of alerts or something, and then you can order it. Absolutely. And I think people who have multiple interactions with different service providers as well, the ability to put that in order in a way that suits you, rather than having to have, take 3 days off in a week or whatever to have different tests or see different parts of the NHS. That's got to be fantastic for people.
Yeah. So you're kind of in transition kind of personally. You don't start the job until 1st of April, but you've been pretty busy this month. You will have done a few things, I'm sure, Jim, or be thinking about doing a few things to kind of prepare.
Yeah.
My sense, though, is that with the change that you've spoken about, this is going to mean change for all of us as leaders. Yeah. Like, we've all got to kind of shift some of our mindsets and how we approach things. Kind of what is your best advice around that? Because you've had a bit of a head start on it.
Yeah, so we had a discussion with a few national colleagues this morning about this thing about, we all talk about ambiguity. Ambiguity is a lovely thing when it's with someone else and not you. we're in a very complex phase now with lots of dynamics, lots of things moving very quickly. I like order, so I'm an accountant by profession. I like things to be packaged, ordered, logical. That's not the world we're in. So I think the first thing I thought about, I went back to some of the kind of COVID prep stuff. First thing we can all do is manage ourselves. Mm-hmm. So get yourself as best you can into that frame of mind of, we're going to go into a bit of a complicated phase. We're in a complicated phase. What does that do to you? How do you manage yourself? How do you get the best out of yourself? How do you manage your energy, your thought processes, your emotions, those sorts of things, because we could carry a lot of people with us. And then there's the process around just trying to focus, prioritize, communicate. We need to over-communicate for a bit to keep people settled, aware of what's happening, being able to cope themselves with what's going on. So some sort of basic management disciplines I always go back to in these things about just get yourself organised, get yourself in good shape, bit of a plan, regroup, and then think about how we'll work together as colleagues as well in their teams, and look after each other and have people who are able to say, actually, I think you might need a break. Maybe we're going a bit fast at this. Maybe we need to take a step back, have a think of this again, and that ability to challenge each other in a safe place. All of those things have been true over the last few weeks as we've been going through this period and we've just started. Mm-hmm. So managing energy is a big thing as well. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
And I think one of the things, as you'll know, in the national role that I've got, we've been working on a new code for managers and leaders and thinking about what's at the heart of that code. And the usual words come up like accountability and curiosity. But the accountability one, I think, particularly given that we've had a consultation run recently around regulation of managers, and also the public. All of us would probably say that sense from the public around greater accountability for people in public roles, whether they're NHS managers or politicians. We're all feeling that lens of accountability in a different way, which is quite right, around transparency. How do you sense over this sort of next period, maybe if we took the short term, Jim, that the lens of accountability may shift? What can we expect as leaders, and what should we expect?
So we should absolutely expect to be accountable to the public. Accountability often it means different things to different people, and I think we've become accustomed to it feeling like an accountable to the NHS system through our hierarchy. The people we're actually really accountable to are those people out there and in the hospitals receiving community services, etc. So there'll be a lot more about transparency of data on outcomes and performance and those sorts of things, helping people make informed choices, helping people hold us to account. We're going to make a change, expect to have to explain it to people and listen to them and take on board their comments. And we've been through my time, different cycles where it would be more publicly accountable. And sometimes that oversteps the mark, and it can be difficult at times, but it's an important thing, an important principle. And less bothered about, there has to be a formal accountability system within the NHS and the hierarchy, but actually think about that public angle more, and our staff as well in that process. And, if we're honest, given the amount of resource the NHS now consumes and as a proportion of public spending, the fragility of the economy, where we are from an international security perspective, our productivity requirements, we absolutely have to be accountable to the public. It takes a bit of managing, and we have to go into these jobs with our eyes open that's part of the job.
Yeah, and I think, certainly in your past year in your role at Newcastle, you've had to tackle some real issues around transparency in relation to quality of services and some big issues. I think there's that whole sense of leading by example. Where do you think we as a group of leaders in the service, if we were to put us all together, would you say if we've got to keep learning in this area, where would you say we need to do more learning, Jim, on this point?
On the accountability point, in my last proper board here in Newcastle, we had a discussion about our default should be in board everything's public.
Yeah.
And then work back with the exceptions. We actually largely do it the other way. So we've got to turn things on the head a little bit. The transparency of data, transparency of external reports, all those sorts of things we've all got to lean into. That's better for us all to do if we do it together. So I think there's always a bit of a fear that I'll start doing that, I'll get all the criticism, next door gets no criticism because they haven't done it. I think we've got to get over that and all take the leap together and be as transparent and as public as we can be. It's very hard to understand why we should have to justify it, isn't it? When we're providing a really valuable service to the public where people's lives depend on it, but we're worrying about being upfront about outcomes, chances of survival, chances of success from a procedure, our productivity, whether it's going to take more time to recover here than it would elsewhere. They should all just be givens, shouldn't they? So I think there's maybe a bit about how we recruit and train people over time to live in that world, because it can invade your life a bit, and people can overstep the mark occasionally, but trust that people will treat it with respect and they'll value that with actually being upfront with people. And then everyone's better, everyone's safer. It's easier to improve performance, improve outcomes when we're in that position.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I know certainly since we set the ICB up, we stream our board meeting live and have exactly the same test around kind of transparency, really, that the public's got a right to know. It's the time of year where our council tax bills are coming through our door, and actually, you open that up, what you're paying for your services. You can see, depending on where you live, you might have a precept for social care, maybe an additional for the local police. And actually, we need to create a stronger sense of connection to the public with how we're spending taxpayers' money. So that whole sense of accountability, you can see that changing. Jim, I do want to kind of pick up what some might call a bit of an elephant in the room. So there's been a lot of speculation, even just in the last few days, about the team that you've assembled being very acute-centric and all great people, by the way, but good at running hospitals, when we know that 90% of the patient contact is done in general practice, out of hospital, the big left shift we need to make. So what would you say to all the keyboard warriors out there kind of commenting on this in terms of the team that you're assembling and that kind of mindset that you're going to have?
Yeah, so I've heard that, and people have talked to me directly about this as well. I've had it out with the colleagues in the national system. First of all, that's not the whole team. I've had to assemble a bunch of people quite quickly to deal with some specific tasks. And the team will change and adapt and develop over time. On the primary care question, I've been asked about that a bit, and we've got Claire Fuller and Amanda Doyle on the team, both steeped in primary care.
Both GPs?
Both GPs. I've actually run primary care pretty much all my career in different ways in the NHS, and there are people with backgrounds in mental health. I talked to Claire Murdoch the other day about how we elevate the mental health perspective as part of this whole thing. So I think the key is, we think back 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we weren't talking about any of this. And then very quickly, over a very short space of time, we've had to assemble a bunch of people to deal with some specific tasks and help get us through this ambiguous period. So we absolutely haven't got everything covered and nailed. That it's understandable that people get anxious about their sector or their part of the forest, and balance and prioritisation. It's for the whole of the health service. We will absolutely be developing the team and the approach to make sure that we've got a proportionate coverage of everything and it's as fair as it can be. In part, the semblance of the initial team, because as I said, the team will build out over time, was partly a recognition that in the planning round, most of the financial pressure, most of the distance from where we need to be on operational targets was acute sector orientated. And also there was a bit of an adjustment for me in there that I'd seen bits of where the 10-year plan was going, and I think there's a huge amount of fantastic stuff in there about mental health, community services, primary care, all those other things. So I think it always feels a bit unfair when you see people make a judgment on something that's incomplete or doesn't reflect the kind of context and circumstances that we're in. But it's a fair challenge, and I feel accountable for making sure that we don't deal with one part of the service and leave others. It's absolutely not what the intention is.
Yeah, no, definitely hear that. And I think, certainly people I talk to and, family, friends, colleagues, even in the last week when, myself and other colleagues would have had to have delivered the same message you delivered to the whole service, talking to our staff, that whether it's a 50% cut in running costs and what that means for people, and we're still working that through at the moment. In the conversations I've had and the message I've had from people know that reform is needed, and that actually we can't keep going and operating the way we are today. So I think in spite of the changes and understanding the magnitude of the impact, kind of holding the hope for what's going to come. So no pressure, Jim, and colleagues, but I guess we've all got a role to play in that and making that happen. Jim, I just want to kind of finish just asking you a bit about kind of how you balance kind of home and work life. As a woman leader, I get asked this question quite a lot. I'm really fortunate that I've got a great partner who kind of helps me out and get the opportunity to kind of get some downtime at the weekends and things. How are you doing it? How are you going to do it? Because you're going to be doing a lot more travelling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has always been a big thing for me. So home is important, family's important, work-life balance is important. I work really hard, as we all do, but I also work very hard at making sure that I'm the best I can be by looking after my physical health, mental health. Big part of that for me is, I exercise a lot. I get time with the family as much as I can. I'm going up the coast tonight, have some fresh air over the weekend. And I was very clear, and national colleagues, including Secretary of State, been very good about I'm not going to be in London every day. So I've come to an arrangement about how many days in London, and the technology allows these things to be more flexible than they used to be. So I think the key is you actually know how you work, know that you've got to have balance, understand the triggers. My wife's really good at managing me, so when I'm doing too much or she can tell when I'm getting stressed or the end of me tether or whatever. She's very good at managing me into a different place. And also if she thinks I'm being too harsh on something or I'm over-focused, I can get over-focused on things. Great at pulling me back. I've got 2 grandsons as well, and honestly, apart from them giving me a cold every 2 weeks, they're great levelers. So that's a really big part of the kind of staying sane. And
I can just see you in the soft play, Jim.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Well, Jim, I just want to kind of conclude just by saying thank you for being the first guest today. It would be remiss of me not to mention the big win at the weekend, seeing the Toon Army win down in London. And I suppose it's been a great week, hasn't it, for us here in the North East?
Oh, absolutely. And what for people can't see, we're in my office in the RV. I always tell visitors here there are 2 things that manage in Newcastle. You're sitting in one and you can see the other out the window, which is St James's Park. And just a huge week, not just for the club, but for the area. And the number of grown men over the last week I've spoke to or heard who said they basically cried all week tells you an awful lot about what this is doing. So fantastic job by Eddie and the team.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jim. Thank you.